The morning they came for her, she had just finished grinding barley for the orphan's bread. Edith, widow of Ceolric the stonecutter, had worn no colours since the Battle of Hastings took her husband and left her with only silence and 3 thin children who no longer asked why. But that day, the Norman soldiers rode through the village with banners bearing the lion and lilies of William's new reign, and one of them, tall, armour still dusted from a southern campaign, read from a scroll that bore her name. By order of the Crown, Edith of Gillingham is hereby remanded to royal service within the new court at Sarum, he declared. Her hands didn't shake. They hadn't shaken in months. She simply handed the barley to her neighbour and kissed each of her children on the forehead. The youngest clutched her skirt, weeping. "I will come back," she whispered, though she no longer believed in promises. They placed her in a cart like grain bound for market, not a woman with scars in the shape of a country lost. Days passed in rutted silence. When she reached the stone halls of Sarum's half-finished keep, her name was stripped entirely. "You are now Lepine," said the steward, a lean man who smelled of ink and rot, the Thorn. She was made to serve in the kitchens, to clean the heels of Norman lords who laughed too loudly and drank too hard. Saxon girls were property now, some taken to warm beds, others to wash blood from cloaks. Edith did neither. She worked in silence, bearing her Thorn name like armour. Then, one night, after a banquet for a visiting knight from Rouen, she found a man waiting in the scullery, not leering, not speaking, just waiting. He wore the sigil of a falcon and had a fresh wound across his cheek. "You are not meant for this," he said softly in broken Saxon. "You carry grief like a sword." Edith didn't answer. She simply placed a bowl of clean water before him and turned away. But that night, she slept with his words in her chest like embers, not warm, not healing, but awake. The next morning, her hands trembled at the basin, and for the first time since the fall of the old king, Edith whispered her true name under her breath. Edith of Ceolric. Not Thorn, not ghost, just a woman not yet gone. His name was Captain Gervais of Rouen, though he never said it himself. It came whispered from servants and echoed in the halls where Norman lords let their laughter drip like wine. He was no friend to the other soldiers. He drank alone, refused to mock the Saxons, and kept a falcon tethered to his saddle instead of a woman to his bed. Edith saw him only in moments, a shadow passing the corridor, a figure standing at dusk on the battlements, while smoke from the hearth curled beneath the grey sky. But one evening, as she lit rushlights in the chapel alcove, she turned to find him behind her again, silent as before. "You used to pray here," he said, not as a question. Edith froze. He stepped closer, eyes lowered. "There's a scar on this wall. Someone carved a name. Ceolric." Her knees nearly gave, but she remained standing. "It was my husband," she said. "He built this chapel before the crown changed hands." Gervais nodded slowly. "And now you serve the men who buried him beneath it." His voice held no mockery, only something close to apology. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. He looked at her then, not with pity, but recognition. "Because they have taken your name. And I've killed too many men to pretend I don't see when something holy is being broken." That night, Edith stood alone in the scullery again, the air thick with lard and ash. She stared at her reflection in the brass pot, wondering when her eyes had stopped looking like her own. In the morning, she found a linen cloth folded at her post. Inside, bread, still warm, and a ribbon of blue, Saxon dyed, the kind her husband once traded for before every festival. No name, no note, just a gesture. She said nothing when the steward asked if she'd seen the captain, but later, as she passed through the courtyard, She looked up and saw the Falcon circling the rampart alone. Gervais stood below, hands clasped behind him, gaze unreadable. And for the first time in weeks, Edith felt the memory of something heavier than grief, dignity, that night. She whispered again, not to God, but to the man who had seen her as more than a thorn. I remember who I am, and so do you. The kitchens of Sarum fed many mouths, but never kindly. Food was weighed and rationed by rank, and Saxon hands bled behind the scenes to prepare meals they would never taste. Edith did not complain. Complaints in Norman courts were like sparks near dry hay, but when she saw the roasted pheasant go to a boy who called her Thorn hag and pour wine over his dog's head for sport, something inside her cracked. That night, after the cooks had gone and the torches burned low, she took a heel of bread from the pantry, a piece no larger than her palm, but warm and honeyed from the king's own supper. She wrapped it in cloth and tucked it beneath her shift. It wasn't for her, it was for her children. She didn't know how she would get it to them yet, but mothers didn't plan. They believed. Just before dawn, as she crossed the narrow stone yard behind the chapel, a voice halted her. You'll be flogged if they find that. Captain Gervais stepped from the shadows, arms folded. She stared at him, unsure if he meant to stop her. He didn't move. I was a boy once, he said quietly, and I remember what hunger did to my mother's hands. Edith's jaw tightened. It's for my sons and my daughter. In Gillingham, the roads are closed, he said, but the messenger riders pass through Wilton every 5th day. Her breath caught. I don't know anyone in Wilton. You do now. He reached into his cloak and withdrew a folded strip of parchment. This seal is mine. The messenger will take the parcel without question. Edith didn't ask why. She simply handed him the wrapped bread. And for the first time in all her days within Sarum, someone took something from her gently. She turned away, fearing that to thank him would make it unbearable. But before she left, she heard him murmur, I hope they eat it before it grows cold. That night, she worked with steadier hands, not for herself, not for him, but for 3 small mouths that might wake to sweetness instead of sorrow. When she looked out the window, the falcon was gone from its perch, flying east, toward home. 4 days passed. Edith worked the ovens and cleaned the wine cellars without question, her mind tight around the memory of the bread, the seal, the hope. She didn't allow herself to wander. She knew better than to expect kindness to reach the end of any road. But on the 5th day, just as the sun split the fog above Sarum's walls, a stable boy entered the scullery breathless, holding out a folded scrap of parchment. For the kitchen Thorn, he muttered before vanishing. Her fingers shook as she unfolded it. The writing was clumsy but unmistakable. It was her daughter's. We shared the honey. Even the baby laughed. Is this a dream? Mother, come soon. Edith gripped the note so tightly it nearly tore. She pressed it to her chest, feeling something she hadn't dared to in months. Proof that love could still travel, even through enemy hands. That evening, as she swept the floor near the armory, she saw the falcon again, circling once before diving to its perch. Gervais stood beneath it, watching her. She didn't speak, but he nodded once, barely visible, and walked on. The gesture was enough. Something wordless passed between them, not affection exactly, but trust carved from silence. She wasn't safe, but she was seen. The steward continued to call her Lepine. The other servants still averted their eyes, but Edith's steps grew more deliberate, her voice steadier. She sang a little when she scrubbed, soft Saxon lullabies no one else recognized. One morning, she left a loaf of barley bread beside the falcon's perch, wrapped in cloth the same color as her husband's old tunic. She didn't sign her name. She knew the captain would know. And when she returned to her cot that night, she found her wool blanket replaced with one finer, softer, folded tightly with a single raven feather inside. She held it for a long time, sitting in the dark, unable to remember the last time her body had been warm without earning it in sweat or fire. She whispered her daughter's name, then her son's, then her own. Not Lapine, not servant, not widow. Edith, the name her husband had spoken with laughter, not orders. The name she would not let die within these walls. And in the stillness she swore a quiet vow. She would leave this place with her name intact, or not at all. It happened during a feast for the king's travelling magistrate, a night of gluttony and veiled threats, where Saxon servants moved like ghosts between goblets and platters. Edith had just set a silver bowl of apples near the dais when one of the Norman knights reached out and yanked her wrist mid-step. Did the Thorn forget how to bow? He slurred, laughter erupting around him. The wine was strong that night, and the cruelty sharper than usual. Edith didn't respond. She simply freed herself and bent to collect a fallen spoon, only for another soldier to tip his goblet, deliberately. Wine splashed down her tunic, soaking her collarbone and staining her shift red like blood. The hall roared, but then the laughter died. Gervais stood at the far end of the room, one hand resting on the hilt of his sword, eyes fixed not on Edith, but on the man who'd spilled the wine. Silence spread like fire through dry grass. "Apologize," Gervais said, voice low but cutting. The knight blinked. "To a kitchen wench." "To a woman," Gervais replied, "or I'll remove you from your seat and let the court watch you beg from the floor." No one moved. The steward paled. The magistrate did nothing. In the stillness, the knight mumbled something like an apology, eyes darting away. Edith didn't wait. She turned and walked calmly to the scullery, her skin burning not from shame, but from the terror of being seen. Gervais found her there minutes later. He didn't speak at first, just took a cloth and dipped it in water, gently pressing it to the stain on her neck. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "You'll make enemies." He met her eyes. "I already have them. I might as well earn them." She stared at him, unsure what part of him she hated for making her heart stir. His silence, his mercy, or the way he saw her without possession. "Why do you care?" she asked, barely audible. "Because," he said, removing the cloth, "someone once gave my mother a way out. I never got to thank them." Edith looked down. Her hands were trembling again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was the weight of something returning, not safety, not yet, but the first breath of it, the shape of an opening door. Rain lashed the keep that night, turning the stone corridors slick and black as coal. Edith was returning from the root cellar when she heard it. The low whistle, not from lips, but from feathers. The Falcon circled just once before vanishing into the storm. She followed, not because she was called, but because she knew. Gervais was waiting near the rear stairwell that led to the abandoned south wing, where no steward bothered and no torchlight reached. He held a key in his palm, small, iron, old. "This door hasn't opened in years," he said, nodding to the alcove beneath the winding steps. "It was once a priest's study, when Saxons still prayed in their tongue." Edith raised an eyebrow. "Why, show me." Gervais didn't smile, but there was something soft in his voice. "Because you have nowhere else that is yours." The door groaned open. Inside, the air smelled of damp parchment and stone. A single table remained, half rotted, and a small shuttered window barely wide enough for light. But to Edith, it felt like a cathedral. She stepped inside, fingers brushing the walls. "It's not much," he said. "It's sanctuary," she replied. He left her there without another word. The next day she returned with a worn cloth and a stub of candle. The day after that, with a folded bundle of herbs. She scrubbed the stone, cleared away dust, and stitched a mat from rags for the floor. It became her refuge, the only place in Sarum where no one shouted her name in jest, no one touched her without leave. Sometimes she spoke aloud in Saxon to the walls, telling them about her daughter's curls, her son's crooked smile, her husband's hands that could split stone but always cradled her face like it might shatter. One evening, Gervais left a book outside the door, an illuminated psalter with both Latin and Saxon script. Inside the cover, a single line, "For your voice, when you choose to raise it." She sat for hours by candlelight, tracing the letters she once taught to her children, and for the first time since Hastings, Edith read aloud without fear. Not prayers, not obedience, just words that were hers. And though the keep above her pulsed with conquest, down in that hidden room a woman was reclaiming the only crown she still believed in, her mind. It was only a matter of time before silence drew attention. The steward, Master Geoffrey, had ruled the kitchens with eyes like hawks and ears sharper still. When Edith began slipping away after her duties, always returning with cleaner hands and a steadier gaze, he noticed. One morning he cornered her by the bread trough, fingers gripping her arm too tightly. "You think because a Norman tolerates your presence, you can climb above your station?" he hissed. She said nothing. "You forget whose hand keeps your children from starving." That was the wound he always twisted, his knowledge of them, the veiled threats that her work here ensured their survival. But Edith didn't flinch. Not now. "If harm comes to them," she said, voice cold, "you'll answer to someone who speaks your tongue and wields your sword." She didn't name Gervais. She didn't need to. Geoffrey's grip faltered. He knew the captain's rank, his rising favor. But hatred bloomed in his eyes. "You'll find yourself in the stocks next," he snapped and stormed off. That night, Edith found her sanctuary door ajar, her mat overturned, her candle stub crushed, but the book was untouched. The ribbon she used as a bookmark remained pressed between pages, right where Gervais had left it. She stood in the ruin of her quiet space and did not weep. She didn't need the room to remember who she was anymore. It had already done its work. Later, by the battlements, she found Gervais adjusting his Falcon's jest straps. He didn't ask what happened. She didn't explain. "The steward knows," she said. He glanced at her, unreadable. "Then we'll act before he does." "You'll protect me?" she asked, surprised by the edge in her voice. "No," he said. "You'll protect yourself. I'm just giving you a window." That night he placed another parchment in her hand, sealed, marked with a crest she didn't recognize. "Give this to the rider bound for Gillingham. Tell him nothing else." Edith stared at the seal. "What is it?" "Your children," he said softly, "will not be alone much longer." The moon shone pale and full above the ramparts. As she walked back toward the keep, Edith felt it, something shifting in the walls around her, not fear, but the taste of it leaving. The thorn they named her had rooted, yes, but it had also bloomed. A week later, Gervais disappeared. No word, no warning, only a folded blanket missing from his quarters and the Falcon gone from its perch. Rumours spread like smoke. He had been summoned to Rouen, or stripped of rank, or sent north to put down a Saxon skirmish. Edith said nothing, but inside, a thread of dread coiled tight. Her parchment had been delivered days earlier. Her children were to be moved from Gillingham to a manor under quiet protection, Gervais' own doing, she was certain. But now he was gone, and she felt again what the steward had always wanted her to feel, alone. Still, she worked. She served with calm hands and downcast eyes. She passed Geoffrey in the corridor and met his sneer with quiet fire. What he didn't know was that the book still lived. The room beneath the stair had been cleaned again. The psalter was now wrapped in cloth, and hidden beneath floorboards she herself had pried loose. What he didn't know was that Edith was no longer surviving. She was waiting. On the 9th day, a rider entered Sarum just before dusk. Mud-slicked, cloaked, and limping, he was led to the stables barely noticed. But in the dead of night, a knock echoed behind the scullery door. Edith opened it to find Gervais haggard, his cloak torn but alive. "They'll search for me," he whispered. "Then why come back?" she asked. "Because I never left you," he said. His voice cracked then, and she saw it, the weariness behind the soldier, the grief he wore like armor. "You gave me back something I didn't think I'd ever earn again. Not peace, not forgiveness." A reason Edith stepped aside. He didn't enter, just reached into his coat and handed her a second scroll, sealed with the Falcon crest. "Your children are safe. A ship will leave for Calais in 3 days. You and they will be on it. No more cellars, no more stolen bread." Her breath caught. "And you?" "I stay. My name is not clean enough to start over," he said, "but yours is." She shook her head. "Then I will not go." "You must." "I won't." "Then let me come with you," he said at last. It was not a question, and in that silence something sacred was sealed, not by vow, not by prayer, but by two people who had nothing left to lose but each other. They waited in silence, gathering what little they had: the psalter, the blue ribbon, the letter from her daughter. Gervais cleaned his sword in the dark, not with urgency, but reverence, as if this final act of defense would be for something more than a crown. Edith packed her bundle like a mother, not a servant, folding each item with care, remembering her husband's hands, her children's laughter, and now, Gervais' quiet defiance. On the second night, the steward struck. Soldiers were sent to search every chamber. Geoffrey had accused Gervais of conspiring with Saxons, of harbouring rebellion. They came armed with writs and pride, but no truth. Edith and Gervais had already slipped beneath the keep, through the old catacombs the priest had once used to escape plague and war. The passage was cold, wet, but real. Above, the castle roared with fury. Below, 2 fugitives held their breath. When they emerged beyond the southern wall, the dawn mist clung to them like baptism. They ran, not with desperation, but purpose. At a way station south of Amesbury, Edith saw her children for the first time in months. Dirty, taller, and alive. Her daughter screamed and ran into her arms, sobbing, "I told them you'd come!" The boys hung back, wary, until Gervais knelt and offered them an apple each. "Your mother saved kingdoms," he whispered, "and she didn't even need an army." They left that night, hiding in a farmer's cart, then taking a small riverboat down the Avon. No guards, no stewards, just wind, time, and the slow undoing of fear. On the 3rd day, they reached the coast. The ship was waiting, small, creaking, and utterly perfect. As they boarded, Edith looked back once, not toward the danger, but the land that had tried to erase her name. She held her children's hands in one, and Gervais in the other. "I buried Selric beneath Sarum," she whispered, "but I carry him with me." Gervais nodded. "And now, let the thorns grow wherever they please." The sails caught the wind. England faded into fog, and a woman once stripped of title, safety, and self stood tall at the bow, still Edith, still whole, never bowed, never broken. Calais did not greet them with banners or gold. It welcomed them with quiet, with bread that didn't need stealing, and skies that held no towers. Edith found a small cottage beyond the city walls, where farmers sold wool and war was only a whisper. The children slept on straw beds near the hearth, but they slept without fear. Gervais, now simply the carpenter, built shutters by hand and caught fish in the bay. He never asked to be called husband, nor did she offer the word, but the rhythm between them was marriage in all but name. Each night Edith sat with her psalter open, teaching her youngest how to read. "This one," she would say, pointing to the Saxon word for home. "Say it out loud." And the child would grin, mispronounce it, try again. They planted a pear tree near the back wall. Gervais carved a single falcon into its trunk. It was not for memory, it was for promise, for what comes after silence. One morning, a boy from town brought them a letter sealed in foreign wax. It held only one line, in Latin, from someone who knew how to find those who disappear. "Your name is no longer a crime." Gervais burned it after reading. "I never needed permission," he said. Neither did Edith. Months passed, then years. The boys grew strong. Her daughter sang loudly when she worked, and Edith, once the shadow in a scullery, became the woman villagers asked for when they needed stitches, counsel, or bread that wouldn't fall flat. They called her Lady, though she had no title. They called him Knight, though he wore no armor. And every time they shared their table, she placed her hand on the wood he had built, feeling the grain of survival beneath her palm. On the anniversary of their flight, she returned to the shore alone. She took the ribbon from her psalter, tied it to a piece of driftwood, and let it sail away with the tide. "Not to forget," she whispered, "but because I no longer need the wound to prove I lived." Behind her, footsteps approached. Gervais, he didn't speak, just placed his hand over hers, and together they walked home, no longer Saxon and Norman, just two souls who had survived the same fire and chosen to build warmth from its ashes. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more soul-stirring stories here on Echoes of England. If you had been there the night she fled through the catacombs, would you have followed her into the dark? Tell us in the comments.